Hello viewers, welcome back.
Hi.
Quick question for you. What's the better hand? 9-8 suited or 6-5 suited? What if I told you that in many situations of poker, playing 6-5 suited ahead of 9-8 suited can be the smarter play? Stick around to see why and how the strategy can boost your win rate. Let's take it to Lucid. Primarily where we're going to see this 6-5 suited being better than 9-8 suited occur is going to be in 3-bet and 4-bet situations. We're going to look at that hijack open, and then we're going to look at the cutoff response. Already what we're starting to see, the 9-8 suited, if we have a look at how frequently there's a VPIP with 9-8 suited, we're seeing it's VPIPing just 13% of the time. If we have a look at our 6-5 suited, we can see that it's VPIPing 69% of the time. Nice. That's a lot more than the 13%, more than 4 times more in fact. Mixture of 3-betting, mixture of flatting. Let's put the cutoff as a 3-bet, and let's forward it back to the hijack and see how the hijack responds. When we go back to the hijack, we can see that facing the cutoff 3-bet, the 6-5 suited is VPIPing 100% of the time, whilst the 9-8 suited, which we know in absolute hand strength is obviously the better hand, is VPIPing just 19% of the time. So why is this happening and what's going on here? Let's dive into it. There isn't one absolute answer, but let's start with pre-flop domination. If we go back to the hijack opening range and have a look at the kind of hands that are open, we can see there's lots of dominating hands here compared to the 9-8 suited. 10-8 suited, Jack-8 suited, Queen-8 suited, King-8 suited, Ace-8 suited, all of the 9-8 suited, and some Ace-9 off. When we look at our 6-5 suited and we think about hands that dominate, there are no offsuit 5x that open, and there's only Ace-5 and King-5. So for example, were we to flop trips with our hand, be it 9-8 suited or 6-5 suited, flopping trips with 6-5 suited typically means that we're less likely to lose a big pot there, being outkicked. When there's lots of dominating hands in our opponent's range, we're less enthusiastic about calling with our hand. Obviously, when we hold 9-8 suited and we flop top pair or we flop trips, and the fact that we can be outkicked a lot of those times by our opponent limits the playability of 9-8 suited, limits the maximum amount of chips that they can extract in those particular situations. With 6-5 suited, we don't face that issue so much. And if the board comes 5-5-4, there's far fewer combinations that have us beat on that board. Now, if we jump to facing the 3-bet, the same thing occurs. Let's look at the cutoff 3-betting range and think about the 9x again. 10-9 suited, Jack-9 suited, King-9 suited, and Ace-9 suited are all there, as is Ace-8 suited. When we think about 6-5 suited, Ace-6 suited is actually not very well represented, and Ace-5 suited is the only other hand that's represented. And so we can once again see a lot fewer dominating preflop hands in our opponent's range, allowing us to realize more EV with a 6-5 suited compared to 9-8 suited, at least in this regard. On top of the pre-flop aspects, let's talk a bit about some post-flop aspects with our hand. Let's imagine we flop the same hand in both cases, the bottom end of a straight with our respective hands. So with our 9-8 suited, it's going to come 10 Jack Queen. With our 6-5 suited, it's going to come 7-8-9. Now, if we imagine that we're in the hijack facing a 3-bet and the cutoff is 3-betting this kind of range, we can see Ace King off is in there at a pretty high frequency. King-9 suited is there at a pretty high frequency. This means that once again, flopping a big hand with 9-8 suited, we have to be a little bit more cautious, and that will beat quite frequently. 10 Jack Queen is beat by Ace King off, 12 combos, Ace King suited, 4 combos, and a mixture of King 9 suited, 62% times 4 combos, 2.4-ish combos. When we hold 6-5 suited and we flop the bottom end of a straight, 7-8-9, in this case, against the cutoff 3-betting range, we're only dominated by Jack 10 suited. Just 4 combos out of a possible 136 3-betting. Let's make the hijack call here and let's put these flops in. When we look at the cutoff 3-betting range, we can see that straights make up 16.58 combos or 14% of their range. If we instead switch this to the 7-8-9, in this case, straights make up just 4% of the range. One final thing to think about. When you hold 9-8 suited, it's not just about the fact that your opponent can have you beat in these situations that makes it a problem when you flop a hand like this. We also hold a lot of hands that beat our opponents, not just 9-8 suited. The prevalence of the fact that when we often connect with 9-8 suited, we connect with a lot of other hands in our 3-betting range, make the EV realization of it when we flop a big hand much tougher. And when we think about the amount of nothing we can have, we have a lot more nothing on this kind of board, representing 54% of the range being unpaired, than when we look at the 10 Jack Queen, where our unpaired hand represent just 24% of the range. The fact that we make weaker value and have less air with our 9-8 suited is another reason why we're going to under-realize the EV from it post-flop everything else being equal. One final thing to think about is the actual equity that 6-5 suited has compared to 9-8 suited. So when we look at, especially when faced with increasingly tighter ranges, as you often see in those 3-bet and 4-bet spots, the ranges get tighter and narrower. The equity loss by having lower cards is actually less problematic with this hand. So on top of the other factors that we mentioned, if we were to take a range of 9s plus, ace queen off plus, and suited Broadway, and we look at 6-5 suited, the equity 6-5 suited has against that range would be 33.1%. We take that same top 5%, top 8% range, and instead take a look at 9-8 suited. Instead of 33%, it actually has 32% equity. So in fact, it has slightly less equity against the super nutted range of 9s plus and ace queen off plus and jack 10 suited plus than 6-5 suited does. Now, in wider ranges, 9-8 suited will have more equity nevertheless. But given what we talked about, given some of the post-flop examples and given some of the pre-flop examples, you can see why, given the closeness of the equities that 9-8 suited and 6-5 suited have against these top-end heavy ranges in the 3-bet and 4-bet pots, and given the difficulty in 9-8 suited from realizing the equity, given the challenges it has post-flop and pre-flop that we've already mentioned, I hope it's perhaps easy to somewhat see why 6-5 suited would be the preferred option between 6-5 suited and 9-8 suited in many of these 3-bet and 4-bet situations. Now, none of the above, of course, means that 9-8 suited is necessarily a bad hand. It's still a very attractive hand, in my opinion, very attractive. The next time you're deciding whether to 3-bet, 4-bet, or are faced with those 3-bets and 4-bets with those very suited connectors, just remember, sometimes the lower option may be the better choice to VPIP. Hope you enjoyed that breakdown of why 6-5 suited is better than 9-8 suited. If you liked it and you'd like to stick around, you're very welcome to give the channel a follow. If you didn't like it and you'd like to leave, you're very welcome to give the channel an unfollow. Please don't, I'll lose my job. Anyway, thank you very much for watching. I'll see you in the next one. Cheers.